Hello there, I'm Greg Sadler, and I'm really excited to tell you about another great educational opportunity that we have coming up in the Study with Sadler Online Academy. It is an 8-week course titled Stoicism and the Cardinal Virtues. So it's all about Stoic philosophy focused on one of the really key central ideas in Stoicism, namely that of moral virtue. And the Stoics divided the virtues, as did a number of others, into 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, justice, temperance, and courage. But then they broke them down further, and their treatments of the virtues are really rich and complex and well worth studying. So for 8 weeks, beginning on June 28th, I'll be leading learners every Saturday morning, at least morning my time. We'll be meeting at 9 Central Time. We'll be going through some key topics and texts and ideas, and we'll do deep dives into each of these 4 cardinal virtues. And we'll also look at some of the other perspectives on virtues that come out of other philosophical schools who are rivals to the Stoics. It's great to see what other people have to say. So it's a fully online class. We'll be meeting using Zoom. We'll record each of the class sessions. So if you miss one, you can go back to it. If you'd like to go back over the class session, you can do so. And the good news is, once you've signed up for the class, you get access to the class for life. So if you want to go back to these recordings years from now, they should be available for you to do that with. So I want to lead you through what we're actually going to do each week, because that'll give you a good sense of how we're going to study this. But first, I want to begin with an observation. So I think everybody who's interested in Stoic philosophy knows the idea that virtue is, either the good or one of the main goods. But then the question is, okay, well, what is virtue? And what are the virtues? And how do we break them down into their, sort of more specific comportments, mindsets? And then, are they going to be sort of habits, or are they knowledge, or what's actually going on there? And there's no one single Stoic text that you can go to get all of this information. Instead, you have to read your way across a lot of the available Stoic texts that we have. So that means studying Seneca, studying Marcus Aurelius, studying Epictetus, studying Musonius Rufus, Heracles the Stoic, Arius Didymus with his epitome of Stoic ethics. And it means reading some non-Stoic people as well, like Cicero, who tells us an awful lot about this. And you've got to kind of correlate all that. Well, that's what I've been doing myself for years. And I also taught this very same class, but in a 6-week format last year. Now we're doing it in an expanded 8-week format, and I've done the legwork for you. So I'm going to lead you into the texts and say, hey, you should check out this passage by this person. You don't have to read the whole book. Just check out this section here, and then we'll see how it correlates to what's going on here. I am actually in the process, the very early stages of writing a book on this very topic. So if you want to study this stuff with me, this is kind of a unique opportunity to really get to know what it is that the Stoics think about each of these virtues. So enough of that. Let me jump in and tell you what we're going to do each week. So the very first week, so we're beginning June 28th, we'll do an introduction to the class. We'll talk about what we're, doing here, which texts they should start out with, and some basics about Stoic ethics. So if you are a complete beginner, this class is perfectly fine for you to jump into. And then we'll talk about why virtue is one of the main goods for the Stoics. We'll compare the Stoics with some other virtue ethicists like the Platonists and the Aristotelians and the Epicureans and some others as well. We'll look at how the Stoics thought the virtues arise out of human nature and help to fulfill it, what the connection to human happiness is. And then we'll look at why there's 4 cardinal virtues and what the Stoics actually thought these were and how they break down into subordinate virtues. So week 1 is going to get us all set up for the 7 weeks following that. Week 2, we're going to do kind of a deeper dive into Stoic philosophy. We're going to look at some common misconceptions that people sometimes bring to their understanding of the virtues. We're going to look at how the Stoics divided matters into the good, the bad, and the indifferent, and what the role of the indifference is for the virtues, which turns out to be quite extensive. We'll also look at how the Stoics understood the emotions and what role the emotions play in virtues and vices. And then we'll look at development. How do human beings actually move away from vices and towards virtues according to what the Stoics have to teach us? And we'll look at one other interesting topic. Do any of the virtues matter more, or do they have a priority over the other virtues? So that'll take us through our second week and second class session. Then from that point on, for the next 5 weeks, we're going to be doing deep dives into each one of these virtues, looking at what they involve, what they comprise, what the Stoic texts and thinkers have to teach us about them. And I decided that we would begin not as we did last time with wisdom. We'll do wisdom at the end. We'll start out with one that a lot of people sometimes overlook, temperance, self-control, moderation, it's often translated as. And so we're going to look at like incorrect and correct understandings and valuations of temperance, how it arises out of human nature, what it is, according to the Stoics, what it includes, what it involves, and why you need to be temperate if you want to actually be happy. We'll look at temperance's relation to some of these other things we talked about, various emotions, the indifference. We'll talk about what matters, because there's a wide range of them that temperance encompasses, and how temperance makes it easier for you to practice the other virtues. And then we'll look at each one of these subordinate virtues that falls under the main heading of temperance. So that's week 3. Week 4, courage, or fortitude, if you like the fancy Latin term for it. We'll look at how that also arises out of human nature, what the Stoics thought that courage really is and includes, why you need it for human happiness. We'll look at the relationship between courage and the emotions, particularly the emotion of anger, aversions, pains, troubles. And we'll look at why the Stoics thought courage was such a massively important virtue. We'll also be looking at the full scope of courage. It isn't just about mastering fears. It also includes dealing with boredom, dealing with pain, dealing with all sorts of other matters, enduring, persevering. All of those are part of courage for the Stoics. And then we'll look at a really important part of Epictetus's work that has to do with courage, confidence, and caution, which, by the way, is one of the good Stoic emotions. And we'll look at the different subordinate virtues, because the Stoics actually thought courage comprised a lot of different things. Weeks 5 and 6 are going to both be devoted to one main virtue, justice. Why are we spending so much time on that? Because the Stoics actually divided justice into two main things. One is what we can call strict justice, like keeping your commitments and, proportioning things fairly and all of that sort of stuff. And this is where a lot of people get, off track about Stoicism. What about kindness? What about beneficence? What about affection towards other people? That's part of justice for the Stoics. So for week 5, we're going to look at justice in the strict sense. We'll look at, again, how it arises out of human nature, why we need it for happiness, what it is. We'll look at this distinction between justice in the strict sense and beneficence. We'll look at why this is so important for Stoics and how it leads us out of the realm of things that are, internal to us, under our control, because justice is largely about the other people in the world and what we call the indifference. We'll also look at some of the difficulties and some remedies for figuring out what really is just in particular situations, and we'll look at the subordinate virtues that fall under justice. Then we'll continue our study in week 6 by shifting focus to beneficence. And so we'll look at beneficence, kindness, generosity, all of these sorts of things that go above and beyond the rules, right? We'll look at the nature of benefits, doing good to other people, and a very important virtue that's connected with this, gratitude, vice of ingratitude as well. We'll look at conditions for exercising beneficence towards others, and we'll look at why the Stoics thought this was so absolutely important, why it was so central to their ethics. We'll also look at some of the difficulties and challenges that arise out of it. You can't actually be good to everybody all the time, or else you'll run out of time and goodness. And we'll look at the connection between beneficence and roles and relationships. So that brings us to week 7, which is the last week in which we'll be looking at particular cardinal virtues. This time, we'll be looking at one of the most important virtues from the Stoic perspective, wisdom, or prudence, if you like. And we'll look at the difference and distinction that can be made between wisdom and prudence and whether they're the same thing or not. We'll also talk about the legendary sage or wise person in Stoic philosophy and what their role is. We'll look at how wisdom and the desire for it arises out of human nature, why we need it for happiness, and what wisdom actually is and involves. We'll also look at how wisdom guides the other virtues and what subordinate virtues fall under wisdom and what those have to tell us about how we should be using our minds and developing them. We'll finish up that part by looking at Epictetus's 3 disciplines or 3 fields, the topoi, that are quite famous in Stoic philosophy, and what their connection to wisdom is. And then our final week of the class, week 8, after we've surveyed the whole field of what the Stoics have to say about these virtues, we'll look at some of the objections, some of the challenges to the official Stoic doctrine on the virtues coming from other philosophers who aren't Stoics, and we'll look at some of the Stoic defenses. The Stoics, you may not know this, thought that you're either virtuous or vicious, and there isn't anything in between, at least in theory. Epictetus doesn't quite buy that. Seneca defends that, but perhaps doesn't buy that. So we're going to look at whether there's some real legs to that doctrine. We'll also talk about the idea of progress and the Stoic official doctrine that there's no increase or progress in virtue, and then whether that's really the case or not. And then we'll look at a few other interesting things. One of them is a question where Seneca actually disagrees with his fellow Stoics. Are the virtues living things within our souls or minds? Some Stoics said yes, Seneca said no, that doesn't make sense. And we'll look at something called the doctrine of the unity of the virtues. The notion that if you have one virtue, you have to have all of them. If you lack any virtue, then you don't have any of them. And whether this makes sense for people who want to practice Stoicism in contemporary times. So that's what we're going to be doing in the class. Hopefully this has given you a good overview and maybe got you a little bit excited about studying these topics. So the link to the page where you can learn more about the course or enroll in the course is below. If you want to join us, I'm happy to have you with us. My classes have some lecture, but a lot of discussion, dialogue, people asking questions, raising confusions or objections, and me doing my best to try to explain those to them. If you know anything about me, you know that as a teacher, my talent is taking really complicated texts and thinkers and explaining them not just for academic students, but people of all walks of life. So I hope that you'll consider joining me for Stoicism and the Cardinal Virtues in its 8-week version. Will be starting before too long. So if you do want to enroll, you probably want to enroll sooner than later. And I'm looking forward to a great 8 weeks with anybody who wants to learn about these really interesting and I would say applicable to our own lives kinds of matters that are coming to us from classic Stoic texts and thinkers.